Kind of felt like I was on that airplane. So I had a few different ideas about what to talk about today. I probably have a different background than most of the people in the room. I came out of IT originally after my philosophy degree, which obviously had nothing to do with anything that I'm doing. And got my MCSE, went into IT, and I moved into kind of sales engineer kind of role and live ball. And in a sense, kind of was part of the birth of the, we call it electronic vaulting. If you look on Google, no one searches electronic vaulting. We're the only people in this room and the people in my company, the only people who have ever called it that. And a few of the companies who have that word in their name. So I was sort of part of that original birth of that industry in a sense. And so I was thinking that I'd talk about a few things. In fact, I had a list. I often have too many things to talk about and not enough time. So I'd actually come up with a list of 9 things that I was going to have as well, and then I realized that would probably take us the next 20 minutes to come up with a conclusion about what we needed to do. So I'm going to skip that part and use my own judgment and talk about a few specific topics. I think that the first thing maybe I can do is talk a little bit about electronic vaulting or online backup, as the rest of the world knows it. And where I see that fitting in, if I can hear my voice crackling, it's probably awful out there. See where I see that fitting in. Still crackling. What are we doing here? Where I see that fitting into your business and how I think that that's going to evolve. And then I thought I'd talk a little bit about this backup and some of the technologies changes that are coming. And then I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about tape encryption, another area where I spend a lot of time thinking and researching and meeting with vendors and so on and so forth. It's funny now that I'm in marketing. My definition of marketing, I don't know if anyone else would agree, but my definition of marketing is it's the only group of people in the company that has enough time to sit back and think about things. In other words, marketing is only people who don't have day jobs. And I kind of have realized in moving into that role that, well, we kind of do have day jobs. So my story didn't quite play out the way I hoped. I think that being in that kind of role and not having the day-to-day responsibilities of running a business or selling a solution, given me a little bit of luxury in the last couple of years especially to take a step back and look at the industry, met with tons and tons and tons of vendors. I'm sure you can imagine how many people want access to our sales force and our customer base. If they knew all the details about our sales force and customer base, maybe they would or wouldn't want it, but they certainly call all the time because I've been in that space. They all seem to sort of funnel into me. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those technologies we're looking at. So let me get started with the electronic vaulting side. So I'll go back in time to 1999 to talk about start with the print song. Like in a sense, kind of the industry feels again sort of like it's back to 1999. The big IPOs going on and a lot of speculative investment in the areas of storage. But in 1999, with essentially the birth of the commercial version of the internet, the idea that companies could leverage that technology and this new ubiquity of bandwidth and cost-effectiveness of bandwidth to solve the problem of getting data off-site was pretty novel at the time. I mean, honestly, I know some of you have been selling that solutions, this type of solution since then. It was pretty novel. At that time, we really had to convince people, not just that they had a problem, that what they were doing was broken, but we also had to convince them that it was worth solving. And we had to convince them that we could do it securely, and we had to convince them that it was reliable. And at that time, the technology, frankly, wasn't that great, so we had to get them to make all sorts of compromises around things like recovery performance and some of the reliability issues and so on and so forth. As time's evolved, the market has, I don't want to say it's matured, but we're still we are in the industry still in this great, well, I guess from your perspective, this great up into the right graph of growth. And looking at the places where we've seen the most success, it's clearly outside of us, most people who are out there pitching online backup are pitching it as an alternative to traditional backup. And it's funny, I've done tons and tons of training over the years of resellers, of salespeople, almost training of customers, I guess you could say, and selling to them. And I often started with this exercise to help them understand what was broken, what problems that they had. And so here's the exercise. Everyone remember the Jetsons? So you have George Jetson, you have Spacely Sprockets and Cogsley Cox. And I don't remember the first name, but there's Mr. Cogsley and Mr. Spacely. So the exercise that we start off the day, and I'm doing some of these events, we start off the day by saying, so let's say you're Spacely, Mr. Spacely, you have the opportunity to get George Jetson to go into Cogsley Cox and basically break everything. You have the opportunity for him to go in and create the perfect, unreliable process. So what would you do? What would that process look like? So I've done this now maybe 10, 15 times, maybe 20 times, and every time, every one of the things, every one of the characteristics, it'd be a process that had 4 motivating factors. It'd be a process that ran out of 10. It'd be a process with no standards, a process with lots of vendors, a process with lots of moving parts, a process with this concept, which I think is a very important concept. I call it a serial dependency. It's a very fancy way of talking about this problem with the chain and the Australian kilograms, the big weight, the person standing underneath, and this concept of serial dependency, which really means that if any one of these things fails, the whole thing fails. So you have to have 100% success across 100% of the process for anything to work. So anyway, the moral of the story was that you go through this process, you go through this exercise, and every one of the descriptors applied perfectly, absolutely 100% perfectly to traditional backup. And the funny thing about it is that, what do they say, that democracy is the least worst way or something like that. It's not that necessarily that it's the best, but there's nothing that's better, so it sort of defaults to the best. But take backup historically has been the best, but not because it was great, but because there weren't a lot of alternatives. And in all the time that I've spent out in the field over the years, and especially the last couple of years, I've probably been out to 50 or 60, I've been out 50 or 60 sales calls in 2007. A whole bunch of different size customers, our enterprise customers through the small and medium markets. And I don't think I've found a single company, not one, who has expressed an interest in maintaining the status quo on the table. In other words, I haven't found anybody who likes what they have. It's not to say I've sold them all on something else. It's not to say that they've had other options. But it's only to say that when we dug into the process, when I asked them, when I got to their sort of visceral response, their passion, their interest, the things that they really care about, none of them said, tape backup is at the top of the list of things that I think works really well, or the top of the list of things that I really like. So that's sort of my entry into talking about online backup. Now, when I first started after the acquisition, one of the things that I did, and it was a little controversial, was I went through the process of honestly trying to go to our management and say, do we really want to be in this business? Not that we want to be in this business overall, but do we want to defocus the people selling and tape vaulting to be focused on selling this other thing? And the challenge with the other thing, the reason that I made that argument was very simple. It was 2 things. One, the core product that we have, which is the product that most people in this room are selling, is phenomenal. It has unbelievable characteristics. Has great customer retention, has good dollars, good margins. It's ubiquitous. Virtually everybody needs it. You just go through the list and there's all these great characteristics. Online backup, on the other hand, has some of the nice characteristics, except unlike tape vaulting, which from our perspective, has a few little blips here and there as people adopt new media standards, it usually changes again. Generally speaking, the same customer goes up a little bit over time in price, and the unit prices go up. Online backup, prices over the last 10 years have looked like this. Somebody was telling me when they started business, it was $100 a gigabyte. We sold one deal, I think, at $125 or $110 or something like that, a gigabyte. Now, I don't know exactly what the going rate across the board, but it's in the sub $10 range pretty regularly. And some companies are even talking about breaking through that $1 a gigabyte barrier. So you have there's interesting graphs. Now, the other graph, by the way, is the data works like this. So it kind of levels out a little bit. But you have a customer who, as soon as they buy it, is now at a price that's too high. Or you forward price it, lose money, and then the market catches up. And by the time when you start to make money on them, they say, I just saw an ad, or I just went online and I found a price and then this thing's going down again. And unlike things like disk drives that have that same basic characteristic of going down really quickly, it's a service. And their perception is that it's pretty easy to switch to another. It's really not that easy, but they think that it is. So that's the first characteristic, that the core business that we're in, the tape vaulting business, is a really pretty strong, very, I think, durable business. When the economy goes south, people still care about the data. When the economy's great, they still care about the data. And the vast majority of companies out there today are still using traditional tape-based backup. But the second reason, and this one, maybe it's more controversial, and I'm sure there's some people who have had different experience with this, is that it's a very low probability sale. And I mean a low probability sale in two ways. One, I've signed up, at LiveVault, one of the things I do is manage channels for a while. And I personally signed up, probably 100 failed resellers. Signed up a few good ones in the middle too. But I probably signed up maybe 100, maybe as much as 200 resellers who, literally didn't make money. Actually, in most cases, lost money if you would include any value of their time in going into this business. Now, I think it's better now than it was then. I think that the market's a little more mature, and companies don't require you to go through a tremendous audit process or go through a 5 2-hour conversations with your engineers to prove to them that it's secure like we used to have to do. But it's a very different sale. So my point is that it's low probability in the sense that it's a tough thing to sell, and so certain categories of salespeople will figure it out and be able to do it. But the vast majority of our salespeople who sell tape vaulting aren't very good at selling. It's even today. We have the law of large numbers, and the dollars are good, so economically it still makes sense. But it's a low probability, high return exercise. And the second challenge is that you're often finding, for a variety of technical reasons, that the companies who you initially want to target are the ones that want to buy this. It was very funny. At LiveVault, we had a history of building a product that the people who really loved the features could use it, and the people who could use it didn't really care about the features. And I think online backup, we got better obviously, but online backup has a lot of those same characteristics. That the people who recognize the problems and the values of the additional things, like more frequent protection, we do continuous protection, some of the other vendors are doing things like that, the ability to deal with security, all those other things. They really like that story. But the market, there's still a lot of limitations. Not with us, but with the market, with the industry. So my message, if there is one in all of that is, I know that some of you have been very successful selling it, but I encourage you to go in cautiously. And I think that there's some interesting models where you can do referrals and reseller models where you don't have any major meaningful investment up front. And the two major companies that we compete with who have a serious offering involved in the secret, I think they're both pretty good. I think I like to think that we usually win against them, but we're the three big ones. So I encourage you, if you were going to go into it, you probably want to pick one of the three who seems to be successful with this. So that was really what I wanted to, my basic message and the conversation about electronic vaulting. The only other thing that I'll point out is that we're starting to see larger companies willing to put up more of the dollars to do this kind of thing, but it's still pretty small business. One of the interesting things as you get into larger companies is that you start to talk about the displacing people as offsetting some of the costs. We think $5,000 or $10,000 a month for an online backup solution is really, really expensive. But when you get to a place where you can say you don't have to hire the next IT person, it starts to pay for itself. So I'll point that out only to say that the dynamics are changing a little bit as Any questions or comments on that? I was going to move on to Gerard.
What do you see down the line that some form of standards will be introduced to the e-bolting business? That, like, obviously at the moment it's a new product. You mentioned before it's difficult to move from one vendor to another. We've had discussions earlier on at this conference about the processes of moving tapes from one vendor to another.
Right.
Will there reach a time when the industry will get together and form some basic standard?
I find that unlikely because I don't think it's in the interest of the industry. And from a customer's perspective, I guess you could maybe make an argument that maybe from a customer perspective there's some value in making it easier. But what the market's done is it's forced us and our competitors to answer those questions at the point of sale, at the time of sale. What happens if we leave? What are the mechanisms in place? And some of us are better at it than others. And I think we have a pretty reasonable strategy there. It's not something we're going to invest a tremendous amount of money in, but we, let the customers in the market dictate to us the terms of that.
And what about things like accountability? That, to start a vault business, you could start it on the cheap, but most people, will start and roll $200,000 into a business to get it started. If you can start an e-bolting business in your garage with, a laptop, what stops those people dragging the industry down? How can a customer know with any confidence that they're dealing with someone with, a data center compared to someone with a notebook in their garage?
It's a great question, and in fact, if you went out to Google and did a search on online backup or some of the variations, you could go, I don't know how many pages show up, but it's thousands of companies. And my only real answer is that the market sorts it out, and it's done a good job at it. A bunch of these companies aren't selling it, and there's some new ones who come in with some innovative approaches. Unfortunately, most of the innovation is around getting the price point down to really low dollars. But the good news for us and some of the other people who've been successful with it, having an existing customer base, having a lot of information about what customers want, and having a lot of operational experience helps us do a better job of keeping, staying competitive in that front. So my short answer is, I think that the market's going to solve that problem, and it's kind of good for customers to have that much choice. And there have been some independent reviews. Honestly, even though we've won some of them, it's probably like any technology. I wouldn't say that they've done a great job of really identifying, what's good and bad about the specific solutions. But I think what they've generally done is separate out the serious solutions from the ones that are, high risk, or ones that don't solve a particular problem. Any other questions or comments on that topic? I'm happy to dive into whatever level it is and whatever after lunch or something, if anyone wants to know more about the origins of the business or the technology side of it. So I thought now that
Geoff, can I just ask you one other question? What impact do you think Mozzie have had on the market with the GE involvement? In that they're offering, unlimited storage for $5 a month.
Right. Yeah, so I don't know if everybody heard that, but the question was what Berkeley Data Systems is a company, Mozzie Pro names the product. There's another company called Carbonite. Nova Store isn't quite at that low price, but they've gone pretty darn close to that. There's some other vendors out there. On the PC side, it's become really price aggressive, more so than on the server side. Although Mozzie does some work there, they don't have any meaningful presence yet, or BDS with data systems. So my answer is it hasn't really impacted us very much. The only thing it's really done, and it's a back and get down to what is the problem that the customer's willing to, or customer needs to solve. And what are the characteristics of a solution that solve that problem? You know, what you often find, at least what I find, is that if you're able to get them over that hurdle of, they think they already know exactly what they want, they think that every solution out there that fits in the category is exactly the same. If you can get them past that to identify which particular problems they really care about and what they want their long-term relationship with their vendor to be, and you put that in the context of, even the money of online backup, which still is a little premium, I guess you could describe it as, compared to their other alternatives, so that's debatable. It's still not a lot of money for most companies. We're still talking about a fraction of a percent of their budget, of their revenues. We're still talking about single-digit percentage of their IT budgets in most cases. So the difference between spending, $5 a gigabyte, or $1, or $5 or $10, it seems like a lot until you take a step back and say, what is it that you're buying with that, and how does that compare to, the risk associated with the problem you're trying to solve. And I think we've been able to do a pretty good job overcoming. We sort of, look at the strength of the vendor and the investment that we're making. And one of the things that, one of the other topics I had to talk about was the sort of backup versus archive and long-term retention and so on and so forth. And one of the challenges in this, buying into an online backup solution, a lot of people are doing 7-year or multi-year retention. And the challenge is what happens 3, 4, 5 years from now? What risk are you in if that company changes their business model, or goes out of business, or is acquired, or changes their technology? And so the stability characteristic, and one of the reasons I recommend that people not generally buy their own equipment, and instead, find a solid provider who has really strong financial backing to do this, is to help customers with that problem. With the problem of, if you're buying a service, let us future-proof the service. Let us take that risk of figuring out how to support new platforms going forward. Let us take that risk of figuring out how to scale this and how to keep the cost competitive and so forth. And that's part of what you get when you buy a service like that. And I think it's one of the things that makes the price question a little less relevant. And we're actually, I had an interesting story. I was just talking to a customer down in Long Island who was looking to, considering our live vault offering, so online backup solution. And they were one of the early adopters, and they picked the wrong vendor. I'm not going to throw out any names, but they picked the wrong vendor. And now they've been burned. And they've been burned in a few ways. It got really expensive because the pricing model was, I think it was a little unethical the way they did it. The pricing model meant that the price grew very rapidly. And they had another challenge. And that challenge was that it just wasn't supporting their business needs. They had some support issues. And the point of the story is that I think that, especially as you get into bigger organizations, that the traditional things that allow you to charge premium pricing over lesser offerings are starting to work. The market's sort of correcting that part of the problem. The market is, that company who's had a bad experience is going to tell a bunch of people that they've had that bad experience. And I think that's going to help us as an industry, be able to, I don't want to say command premium prices, but price things reasonably. Price things based on, our costs and need to make money, and based on the risk that we're reducing for the customer. So it's good. I think that the progress in the market and the competition, I don't think it's hurt us. I think it's been very good for us. In our own position, we have, found that when somebody goes out and looks at one of these, if you knock on their door, that they go out to Google, and we all have a free chance if we're going to spend the money on getting that customer to call us. And so that, I think that it, just like it would take faulty business, I think the more successful most of us in the room are, the more successful the rest of us will be. Because I think that it's more about the awareness driving that demand in the market than it is about us, competing for scraps. I think that the online backup market is even less penetrated than I know that it's much less penetrated than the take vault market. Any other questions on that? I was going to move on to talk a little bit about the two other topics were disk backup and And so, as a consequence of that, we're going back and reevaluating some of the assumptions that we've made around security and measuring our responses to some of the, the hype's the wrong word, but the concern, the industry concern around inadvertent disclosure. It's not to say we're making bad decisions, we're not making investment, but we're just looking at, the bigger market, the longer term market and saying, what's going to change when this happens? So I thought for a minute I'd take a step back from that and just explain sort of the flip side of that, why it is that companies haven't just jumped into tape encryption, and why it just seems so obvious. If you're worried about losing it and you can encrypt it and not have to disclose it, so you don't care about losing it, why don't you just do it? So I thought I'd just take a step back and explain some of that. I don't know whether it would be helpful for the people in the room, but it might give you a little bit more context as you're talking to customers and your salespeople and so forth. So tape encryption basically suffers from three problems. And arguably one of the problems has already been solved. The first problem is performance. And that's the one you could argue has been solved. If you look at new technologies like this, they generally go through an evolution. They start with software, then they move to some variation of appliance-like device. Then they move to hardware. Well, we've kind of gone through that evolution. The new LTO4 drives shipped with encryption. IBM and it's now Sun with the STK acquisition. A lot of those drives are now shipped with encryption built in. So that's the first challenge. When you get to smaller accounts where they're looking at software-based encryption, still using like the backup exec encryption or whatever, the backup software using that encryption, the performance toll is substantial. It can reduce the speed in half. In other words, double the time it takes to do backups. So that's still a meaningful problem, but there are solutions to that. The second challenge is, I attended a presentation a couple of days ago at a university. We had a speaker come in from Dell who's thinking a lot about security and looking at, honestly, looking at reinventing themselves, trying to figure out what to do next. And one of the areas they're putting a lot of energy into is security of information, especially security of information sort of out there, whether it's thumb drives or laptops or PCs, disk drives on servers. And I think it was actually kind of a funny presentation because he mentioned key management, I think something like 25 times in the presentation. And sort of became a joke every time we say key management. People laughed because he said, I'm going to say key management 3 times during his presentation. And then every time he'd say it, yet again, repeating that was the important thing. Key management is a very simple problem when you think about it. Think about a key to a door, and that door and that key cannot be changed for 7, 10, sometimes 30 years. The person who had access to that key, sort of almost by definition of having access, let's say that in this analogy, everyone's walking around with a device to copy the key, because essentially you are an encryption key. So once somebody has a key, you can no longer assume that they don't always have the key. Most of the people who have the key on average, statistically, I forgot what the average IT tenure is now, but it's something like 2.5 years between jobs. So over 7 years, what does that math work out to? We'll move something like 3 times. So, on looking at it statistically, the person who had that key is no longer there, nor is anyone around that person 7 years from now. But you can't change the lock. You can't change the key. And you have the other problem, which is the door is impenetrable. If you lose the key, you lose the data. There's no, you can't open that door. There's that's the whole point. So you're stuck with this problem of how do you manage that? One of the ways that people are looking at doing it is creating a layer of abstraction on top of the key itself, sort of a key. We did this at LiveVault where we have, you end up with a bunch of really funny sentences because you encrypt the encryption key, then you transfer that over an encrypted tunnel and so on. So you end up, this thing's encrypted like 27 times in the process. But at the end, what you have is another layer that sits on top. So that in theory, you'd be able to recover that key again, you'd be able to change that key. Because you're not actually changing the key itself, you're changing the access to that key. Well, the challenge with that is it's even harder to implement than it is to describe. And when you get into the details of that, it's a really, really tough problem. And how do you do the authentication? How do you know who's supposed to have access to that? And how do you know how to change that and change the mechanisms? And then you throw in the worst possible thing, which is the point of this. Let's not So now you have to account for the fact that, you know, one of the three people who are authorized to do this is, you know, maybe none of them are available. Maybe it's one, maybe it's two, maybe it's three. So some of the vendors have looked at a solution. I think they proved does this, where you can have 2 or 5 people turning their keys at the same time to access that. You know, that's where their layer of abstraction on top of the actual keys. Anyway, I don't need to go into all the details of this. But the point is, that's a really freaking tough problem to solve. And the third problem is, imagine having to do that 7 years from now when the vendor's not in business anymore. Then it gets really tough. So the point of number 3 is that the winners haven't been announced. And so the major financial institutions, you know, it's remarkable to me that they haven't figured it out. Virtually none of them are encrypting their tapes. At least the majority of the tapes. And one of the interesting things that, you know, people who you know, from my perspective, haven't spent a lot of time in IT or don't really understand the technology side of this, you know, a lot of people say, well, just have them separate out their data. You know, just get the really, really sensitive stuff on one tape or something like that. And it sounds great. It sounds totally rational. It sounds totally reasonable. And I'm sure I see a lot of people smiling here because they know that it's an extraordinarily tough thing to do. And not only is it an extraordinarily tough thing to do, but almost by definition, it's a very expensive thing to do. And you get back to almost the same problem you have with the keys. Who in the world decides which information data classification from? Who in the world decides which data is important, which data is not important, which is sensitive, which is not sensitive? Some of it's easy and obvious. There's a whole bunch that's not. You think about, you know, the financial services or the healthcare provider. You know, somebody breaks the rules. All of a sudden, you have a social security number somewhere it's not supposed to be. All of a sudden, you have healthcare information on a place, you know, a location that's not supposed to be. So the idea of separating it out, there are places where it works, but the vast majority of companies, in my opinion, won't be able to do that. Yeah.
Just to add to that, Geoff, 2 things. In 9/11, Merrill Lynch lost their whole certain operation at the World Trade Center. They had 6 or 8 people perish that had this, at that time, key or code information or whatever. They put them in an apartment for 2 months, trying with each other to decide on those 6 people's kids' names, things, everything. And they finally gave up on that project. The United States Congress, the bills that are for data security, for the lost data, as Geoff has mentioned, they're hanging their hats on encryption. And I got to tell you something, for the guy that works for the same company as you, I just learned something that I didn't know, because they think it's just the answer, end-all answer. Encrypt it, don't have to disclose, end the story. Why wouldn't every company do it for insurance?
Right. My belief, by the way, is that all 3 of those are solvable problems. The third one, by definition, takes time. Because, you know, it's not until, you know, I sound like I'm lecturing on a free market economy thing or something, but, you know, the market will figure out which is the winners. My guess is it will look like some variation of an open standards, like you have LTO and DLT. You might have 2 different standards, and, you know, probably one or both of them will be a consortium of companies who come together and say, and they're working on this problem. I mean, it's not like this is a novel idea. They're out there thinking about it. But you have a problem with, you know, like standards and anything else. That, you know, how much of the standard, how much of your intellectual property are you going to give up to the standard? How much of your differentiation are you going to give up to the standard? There are a bunch of people making a bunch of money helping companies solve that encryption key management / encryption key escrow or whatever type of challenge. There are a bunch of people out there doing that. However, and they're making money on it, so they're not necessarily tied to just, you know, say our methodology is the one the industry should accept, and all of a sudden no longer have any intellectual property. So it's a tough problem. It's a really tough problem. So the last thing that I wanted to go over a little bit, actually going to throw in one very quickly, and this is kind of counter to the online backup or the disk-based approach, and I'll talk a little bit about this backup. I recently wrote a paper via DRJ, Disaster Recovery Journal. It's supposed to be this fall, but they moved it to the spring. And it's a concept. I didn't come up with the concept. I just maybe came up with a slightly novel way of looking at it. What I describe as diversity in data detection. And what the point of the article, and the point that I think is important, and I think personally, I think it's something. It's tough for salespeople to understand because, you know, and they're both very reliable, but they're linked together. In other words, the same thing that could impact one could impact the other. You're statistically basically throwing out the reliability of the second. Does that make sense? So, I'll give you an example. Let's say that you use replication. This is the easiest example. There are other examples that get into much more complicated scenarios. But let's say you do replication. Most people will recognize this example. You do replication, and you buy whatever Exosoft or Double Tape, one of those products. By the way, it's a pretty mature market. They work pretty well now. You replicate your systems from one location to another. The locations are fine. There's nothing bad that happened there. But you have a virus that came in. Well, the virus that impacted the first system now impacts the second system. So you now have this challenge that although, statistically there are a whole bunch of things that are autonomous and both those systems are very reliable by nature, because you had the same relatively low probability thing that impacts both at the same time, or could impact both at the same time, you kind of lost that redundancy. And the reason I bring this up is that tape, more than anything else, even though, I had some great new data that says even today 40% of recoveries fail from tape. I've heard that over and over and over again. I talked to, I'm not going to go into details, but I talked to a vendor who is somebody who should absolutely positively know because they're in that business. And they said, look, it's still 40%. So even with 40% failure rates, which by the way doesn't mean 40% complete failure, in some aspect fails 40% of the time, it's still statistically a very relevant and very, the ROI is exceptional to get that level of diversity, that level of statistical improvement, because there are virtually no things that can impact an online system that can also impact an offline system that's in a different location, that's obviously not online, not spinning, has no access at that time, generally is in its own proprietary format, generally is on an entirely different type of medium. So you have basically across-the-board diversity. And even though it's not statistically nearly as reliable, it has virtually no dependencies, no links on the other. So from a raw statistics or probability perspective, it's actually probably the best ROI you can have is to have tape in the back end. I can spend half an hour and convince you why there's a better argument on the other side, but I think that that's a pretty legitimate argument. I think that that's and it's not that you have to get out there on whiteboards and walk through, if you have 0.9 times 0.9 and all these different probabilistic equations. But I think that the basic concept of diversity of media makes a really strong argument, a really strong case. It's not just diversity of media, it's diversity across many, many, many different planes and many different levels in that process. So last thing I want to talk about very quickly is dispatch, and specifically what's happening there, what it is, why people are doing it, and maybe dispel a few myths. How many people here have heard about VTLs and virtual tape libraries? So this is probably most of the people in the room. So virtual tape libraries, it's funny, there's a thing called virtual tape, and this thing called virtual tape libraries are actually different things with different problems, but they look a lot alike and have very similar names. I'm not going to really talk about virtual tape much. Virtual tape is sort of, it's odd. It's sort of a way to make mainframes operate more like open systems, where you pile all the stuff onto the same tape. So you have tapes that are fuller as opposed to tape per application like mainframes historically have done. Virtual tape libraries, on the other hand, which we'll spend some time on. Virtual tape libraries are really about, this is going to sound funny, they're really about a really inexpensive way to fix tape backup. And a lot of them have their sights set on replacing tape backup. But the fact is the vast majority, the market share of VTLs and that, there's a bunch of other definitions, but they also fall into that same category, where they basically pretend that they're a tape drive, show off themselves as a big tape library, tape robotic device, and simulation software, that's what I was looking for. So it's basically simulation technology that allows this device to look like tape. And then when they get that data through the backup stream, they understand a little bit about the context, and they're able to do things like data deduplication, they're able to do things like keeping that information stored online versus offline. They're able to do things like, in some cases, Some of the VTLs don't actually write it out to tape, they just sort of serve as a secondary target, so you have that disk-based copy, and then you send, take the place of like an on-site set of the back of tapes, and then you can still write the data out to tape. I guess the point is, as I'm running out of time, the point really is that, in a funny way, it's actually really good for our industry. And I made this pitch internally. And the reason it's really good for our industry is because it demonstrates two reasons. One is it makes tape backup work better. When tape backup works better, people care more about it. And two, it gets the checkbook out to think about these problems. It shows evidence that people really care about this. They didn't care a few years ago. It was remarkable to me outside of, maybe the top 10 or top 100 companies, or top 5 or top 10 industries. It just didn't matter that much that it failed half the time. But it's starting to matter a lot. And so I think that when you walk through that math, at least for the foreseeable future, it's actually really good for us. Because it means that people are thinking about it, people are willing to spend money on it, and people are thinking about how you actually solve the problems. And so when you put the pieces together, you have companies who are saying, I'm looking at data domain. Well, my opinion, it'd be helpful for our salespeople to have some contextual understanding of what that means. They don't need to know the difference between data domain and step time and diligence. That doesn't matter. But what does matter is that I think that they understand kind of what that means. What it probably means is that they're going to create a little bit less tape. It probably means that they'll send the same amount to us. And it probably means that they're thinking more about the problem. And doing things like getting daily versus weekly pickup become much more profitable because they just spent $100 grand on this problem. And they have a whole bunch of executive interest in this because they just spent that money, they just went through that process. So I think, generally, again, I go back to, I think it's a good thing for us. I don't think any of us should get in the business of trying to sell that stuff. We've looked at that, and it's so complex, so technical, and so out of our, even with a lot of technology people we have in our company, it's way outside of our purview. And frankly, I think it's a market very quickly consolidating, some companies are going public, and I think the margins are going to be driven out of that business relatively quick because it's just so competitive now. So that was what I want to talk about. I ran out of time here. Are there any other questions? I think we have about 30 seconds left.
TSM and Cobalt. Have y'all played around or have you seen anything on the encryption side of that? Cobalt and Kubernetes, TSM is a plugin. I get clients all the time actually for recommendations on which pieces to really look at since both of them are virtual. Really?
Sure. So I don't have expertise, so I don't know what those two products are. I've had a lot of experience with it, but I don't know. I couldn't tell you which of their encryption methodologies are better. I will tell you that my own perspective, what you really want to figure out is what's going to win. Because that's what matters. What I mean by what's going to be here 5 years from now. And my view is that if you follow the evolution of other things, it's going to be some variation of the hardware itself is going to fix it, or it's going to be a board on the system. It's going to be some hardware-oriented, specialized solution to solve the performance problem. And I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be some variation of encryption-free escrow services, that it'll be service providers, whether it's us or somebody else, who will probably play the winning role there. Because I think that's the only, you're going to end up with like the PKI infrastructure, you're going to have, VeriSign-like companies managing those keys, because I think that's the only way you can really do it in the long term. I could be wrong about that, I'm just guessing. Good. Anything else?